Okay, I think we're ready. As I said, Carmel will try and get her back for some Q&A later, and of course there's a lot to unpack about her speech. I know a lot was very relevant to me in my life and my experiences in the various places in Australia I've lived. And it's the second time in a month I've heard the story of the Borroloola Library. One of our Victorian storytellers, Jan Wazitsky, does a story about Bill Harney, who lived up that way and was the first ranger at Uluru, and a great raconteur. But now moving on to our next speaker, Danielle Wood. I've just finished reading Little Rosie's Cautionary Tales for Girls. Again, another book, unputdownable. And I can't talk about the last story. It's still sitting with me in my throat. It's a series of interconnected short stories. And the last one kind of reaches up and just kind of grabs you like this. And it's still sitting there. I only finished it about 2 days ago. Danielle, where's my notes about your life? Here's what Danielle sent us. Danielle is the author of a novel, The Alphabet of Light and Dark, in 2003. A collection of short stories with a fairy tale flavour, Rosie's Little Cautionary Tales for Girls 2006, and a work of non-fiction, Housewife Superstar, The Very Best of Marjorie Bly 2011. Is she that wonderful woman who wrote about how to tie up your tomatoes with bras? And yeah, she's fantastic. She's also co-editor Deep South Stories from Tasmania and editor of Marjorie Bly's Home, Hints on Managing Everything. Including, is it to keep the frost off the tomatoes?
She just uses those old corset-style bras as plant protectors.
Excellent idea, excellent idea. I am an urban gardener with an urban forest, wiki beds, all that kind of stuff. You need to know this about pantyhose and excellent stuff. Her books have been published overseas and in the USA, Italy, Russia and the Netherlands. Together with Tasmanian writer Heather Rose, Danielle's is Angelica Banks, author of children's novel Finding Serendipity 2013, the first in a planned trilogy. Danielle is a winner of the Australian Vogel Literary Prize 2002, the Dobby Prize for Australian Women's Writing 2004, and she has twice been named a Sydney Herald Best Young Novelist of the Year 2004 and 2007. Her forthcoming book is Mother's Grimm, a collection of contemporary fairy tales. Danielle lives in Tasmania and teaches writing at the University of Tasmania. My daughter's there. Has she handed in her assignments, do you know? So I'm just moving that mic in so you can speak right into it. Please welcome Danielle.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. Thank you, Carmel, for that fantastic keynote. Now, I'm just going to start with a little preamble and then I'm going to read to you. So I wanted to start by reminding you about some conversations that you know. You know the ones. They're the conversations you have at friends' parties or maybe at your partner's Christmas work dinner or something. And for me, these conversations usually go something like this. The person I'm sitting next to or standing next to says, "So, what do you do?" And I tell them that I'm a writer. And usually at this point they look surprised. I think they were expecting teacher or psychologist or, I don't know, homewares gift shop owner, something, but not writer. And sometimes they look rather alarmed as well as surprised. I think that they're sometimes worried that I might actually be famous and they don't know who I am and they're about to be found out. But more often than that, they look at me as if I'm a bit deluded. And the next question is, "Oh, are you published?" And I reassure them that yes, I am. And then they say anything I would have heard of. And I fend off the temptation to say, "How would I know? I only just met you." And sometimes, and this happened to me quite recently, they'll say, "Well, what sort of thing do you write?" And I say, "Well, I'm interested in contemporary twists on fairy tales." And so the most recent time that I went through all of this, the person that was sitting next to me gave a little snort and said, "Oh, that's very in, isn't it? Aren't you worried that it's all just a fad?" But that's the thing, isn't it, about fairy tales, and I know I'm talking to the converted here today, that there may be periods in history, such as right now, when fairy tale inventions are particularly in, and they're bursting all over the big screen, the small screen and the bookshelf. But has there ever been a time in human history when reinventing fairy tales was out? I doubt it. So a few years ago I published this book, Rosie Little's Cautionary Tales for Girls. Now Rosie Little is a little Red Riding Hood character. She's the narrator of all 12 stories in the collection, but she's only the star of about half of them. Most of the stories, appropriately for Little Red, are coming-of-age stories. Now, after that book, I did sometimes wonder what would happen if Rosie were to grow up, and if there was another book in that. And my new book, which comes out in September, is called Mother's Grimm. Now, there is no Rosie, so she doesn't exactly grow up. There is no explicit link between the two books, but I think that they do come from a very similar place, which is an appreciation of just how beautifully fairy tale structures, motifs and characters lend themselves to interrogating human relationships. I was reading an article on fairy tale reinventions by a Canadian scholar, Lisa Fiander, and she said this. She said, "Fiction writers are most likely to draw upon fairy tales when they are framing, in writing, a subject that generates anxiety in their culture. When we describe something as like a fairy tale, we are identifying, after all, its distance from real life. Disappointment is at the heart of the simile." Now, my subject in Mother's Grimm, quite predictably, is motherhood. And when I came across Fiander's quote, it rang very true for me. I think parenting is a subject that presently seems to be about as in as fairy tale reinvention, and it's certainly a subject that stirs up a lot of anxiety in our culture, replete with those famous gaps between fantasy and reality. So in Mother's Grimm, what I've been interested in is things like the way pregnancy is fetishised, the way women police each other's mothering, the coexistence of love and resentment in motherhood. Now, I'm a mother of 3 myself, and my publisher thinks this book is going to send my children into therapy when they're older. But it's not a book about me. It's a book about everything I've seen and heard and observed and been told. And I've tried to be honest. So unlike Rosie Little's Cautionary Tales for Girls, Mother's Grimm isn't a short story collection, it's a long story collection. Now, some of you might have seen Mandy Sayers' wonderful book, The Australian Long Story, which collects, I think there are 8 or 10 long stories of about 15,000 words. So there are authors represented in there like Elizabeth Joly, Tim Winton, Louis Nowra, Gillian Mears, Peter Goldsworthy. It's a brilliant collection, I highly recommend it. Anyway, this is a length of story that I particularly like, and in my book there are 4 tales, each between about 12 and 15,000 words. And they're called Lettuce, Cottage, Sleep and Nag. And each of them intersects with a specific fairy tale, but they're not precisely retellings. So Lettuce, as you'd imagine, talks back to Rapunzel, Cottage to Hansel and Gretel, Sleep to Briar Rose, and Nag, which is probably the least obvious connection and the least obvious choice, talks back to the Goose Girl. So Lettuce is about a group of women who go to the same pregnancy yoga class, and one of them is not like the others. Cottage is the story of a mother who never wanted to put her children in childcare, but finds herself with no other option. Please don't imagine, though, that any of my stories make judgments. I don't believe that it's a fiction writer's job to provide answers or anything like them, only to find new ways of asking the questions. Sleep is about what happens when a young mother doesn't get enough of it. And Nag is set in 1958 in rural Western Australia. It features a talking horse and circles around questions of how we inherit and transmit certain ideas of motherhood. Now, I'd have loved today to read you one of these stories, to read you a whole story, but they're much too long. I tried to cut a couple of them back, but I felt like I was mutilating them, so instead I'm going to read you the prologue to Mother's Grimm, which is called The Good Mother, and it was first commissioned by the wonderful Carmel Bird. Thank you, Carmel, for her edition of Griffith Review, Once Upon a Time in Oz. So some of you may already have read The Good Mother. I hope you won't mind hearing it again, this time out loud. The Good Mother is something of a fairy tale medley, or an overture if you like. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Now that you think about it, you realise you've known her your whole life. On the magazine pages and billboards of your childhood, she was as fair as Rapunzel with a shoulder-length haircut. You were indifferent to her back then, barely registered her presence. Or so you think, until you realise that you can remember precisely the way her hands looked, their fingernails short and practical, although still perfectly tipped with white crescent moons, as she drew V-shapes in menthol rub onto the chests of her ailing children. She wasn't always the Vic's mum, of course. Kneeling by the bath, she would soap her toddler's blonde mop into a quiff of white foam and promise you no more tears. To soothe the unsettled infant, she could provide her favoured brand of paracetamol, as well as the comfort of her pert, moulded bosom inside a candy-coloured shirt. With a plump, two-toothed cherub on her hip, she would deholster a spray pack and vanquish the invisible nasties on the bright white porcelain of her toilets and sinks. For she was the good mother, as safe and mild and effective as every unguent she ever squeezed from a pinkly labelled tube.
Danielle, can you speak up slightly because the reverberation makes it happen?
Sure. The good mother had the powders to return muddied soccer shirts to brightness, and the potions to ward off sore throats and flu. But you realise now that her true power lay in those hands with their Frenchly polished nails. Remember how she placed them, coolly, on fevered brows, cupped them around mugs of chocolatey yet nutritious fluids, splayed them protectively over the shoulders of her sleeping babes? Yes, you remember. Although it occurs to you only now how implausible it actually was, that the peachy boys and girls they found to match her could actually have been born from her trim blue jean hips. Come to think of it, where did those children come from? Did Dad ever come in from the breadwinning for long enough for her to rest a hand on the honest chambray of his shirt front? If he did, you can't remember. This is how it is for the good mother. She pricks her finger while she's embroidering. The bauble of blood teetering on her fingertip sets her to thinking, and soon she's noticing the deepness of the red and the way it shines against the snowy ground beyond her window. Add the raven's wing black of the window frame and voila! She's knocked up and chosen her child's colour scheme to boot. This is how it is for you. Deep in denial, you hardly even tell yourself when you stop taking the pill and start taking folate. Your partner would probably be quite interested if you were to let him know how much better is an unprotected ovulatory orgasm than a regular one. But this knowledge feels for some reason like a secret, so you keep it to yourself. Although you become obsessive about taking your temperature, and despite your new habit of cooling your post-coital heels high on the bedhead, there's nothing doing. You get your many test kits from different suburbs so that the sales assistants in the pharmacies don't start getting to know you. But no matter how many mornings you lock yourself in the bathroom with a bladder full of potent overnight piss, there's only ever one little line in the window of the white stick. It's been 3 years since the rash of weddings in your life, and now it's 30th birthday parties. And there she is, over there by the cheese plate, scooping a strand of fair hair behind one ear and staring down the camembert as if she knows its sole purpose in life is to kill her unborn child. You haven't thought of her for years, if you ever thought of her consciously at all, which is why you don't recognise her. You say hello, and she clinks her water glass against your thrice-emptied champagne flute. Wearing something white and tight, she sinks into a chair and sighs, and it's only now that she stretches a hand a full octave across her belly that you notice her fingernails. They're exquisitely oval and pink as confectionery, each one smoothly iced with white. She gestures at the empty chair beside her, and then somehow you're sitting in it. At all those weddings, people would ask, "So, what do you do?" Not anymore. "Do you have children?" she asks, stroking herself as if she is her own pet. "No," you say. Not yet, she soothes. Fuck off, you wish. You're first? You ask, tilting your champagne towards her belly. Oh, God, no, this is my third. She laughs and her free hand flies up into the air. When it lands again, it's on your knee. She looks right into your face and smiles. I'm so fertile that my husband only has to look at me and I'm pregnant. You make deals with God. You make deals with the devil. You're not fussy. But as a wise man once said, it's the saying you don't care what you get, what gets you jiggered. So you say it, and you're jiggered. But what you give birth to is a hedgehog. It's prickly, and its cry is a noise so terrible that you wish somebody would scrape fingernails on a blackboard to give you some relief. You learn that hedgehogs are both nocturnal and crepuscular, but yours doesn't sleep in daylight either. In search of support and camaraderie, you join a mother's group. You turn up at the clinic covered in prickle marks with your squirming hedgehog in your arms. The other women are already there, sitting in a circle, nursing their soft, boneless young. The only seat left is beside the good mother. She's wearing pale pink and making smooth circles on her baby's back with her hand model hands. Things are different since you last met, and you're prepared to forgive her, if only she'll tell you how it is that her eyes are so bright and her skin so clear. You're desperate to know how it is that her shiny golden hair is brushed. Clearly her child sleeps, but what is her secret? You know what they say, she says. Come, mother, come, child. One day you fall into a deep, deep sleep. Valiantly the prince fights his way through forests of fully laden clothes horses, past towers of empty nappy boxes to reach you where you lie, with your rapidly greying hair straggling around your face. He puckers up, his lips brush yours. You stupid fucking prick, you yell at him. What the hell do you think you're doing? I only just got to sleep. This happens more than once. Your hedgehog, though, gradually morphs into a child. A boy whose sunny countenance is sufficiently beautiful to make you forget the spines and the sleeplessness. When you conceive again, you are pregnant with the vision of a placid, smooth-skinned human girl child, but what you give birth to, although female, is just another hedgehog. When Hedgehog 2 is a year old, your partner announces he's leaving you. I think you have a personality disorder, he says. Of course I have a personality disorder, you say. I haven't slept for 3 years. So your partner moves out, just as your maternity leave expires. Your plan had been to go back to work part-time, but now that you're a single mother, you have to work full-time to afford the childcare for 2 kids. The economics of this confuse you, but you're too busy thinking about how you're going to manage to worry about that as well. When you go into the childcare centre to make inquiries, your little hedgehog clings to you and makes her sanity withering cry. The carers hold closer the human children they have in their arms and offer you a 3-day trial to settle in your hedgehog before you have to leave her there for real. On the first day you leave her, she screams until she vomits, so you take her back home. On the second day you leave her, she screams until she vomits, so you take her back home. In a fairy tale, things are always different on the third go. But this is life, and on the third day you leave her there, she screams until she vomits, so you take her back home. Then comes the day that you are to go back to work. Is that Rumpelstiltskin giggling in your mindscape as you hand over both your second-born child and the bale of hay-spun gold? The carer takes a tentative hold of your hedgehog. You smile and you coo. You turn your back and walk out the door, and as you do, you hear your hedgehog screaming. The effect is rather like having your uterus torn out through your ear holes. You are sure you can smell vomit. You can only just make it out the kiddie-proof gate before you begin to weep. The weeping makes you red and puffy in the face, and now you are hardly presentable for work. In order to pull yourself together, you call into a cafe. You open the door and look inside, but every table is taken. There's one bar stool, but you think perhaps it's the good mother sitting on the neighbouring seat nursing a peppermint tea. You're not certain, but there's something in the blonde foils that makes you wonder, and you're in no mood for her today. And besides, you are too experienced now to fall for her old empty seat routine. Outside there are no free tables either, but 2 women who are taking up only half of a large table gesture for you to join them, so you do. Thank you, you say, and they nod in unison. You take out your fold-out mirror and try to hide the blotches on your face with powder. Then you notice how peachy is the skin of the raven-haired woman sitting on the same side of the table as you, and the skin of the redhead sitting across from her. Each of them has a slimline pram in a bright, interesting colour. They push their prams to and fro with gloved hands. The gloves are reasonable, aren't they? It's winter. It's cold. You're telling yourself all of this even though you already know. No, it's her, both of them. And although she's talking to herself across the table, she's really talking to you. How old? One of her asks. 1-year-old. The other one says with a can you believe it manoeuvre of the eyebrow. Incredible, she says. I mean, is there anybody who thinks it's a good idea to leave a 1-year-old in childcare? You take a vow of silence. You will not speak to her. You will not look at her. You will not accept seats at her cafe table. Out of the corner of your eye, you glimpse her, auburn-haired in a Dettol advertisement, and wonder when you're going to clue up to the fact that these days her hair can be any colour at all. You tell yourself that the consequences of breaking your vow is that your 12 brothers will turn into ravens, or something. In order to hold to your promise, you make sudden reversals in supermarket aisles, hide from her in clothing store change rooms, buy bigger sunglasses for their greater protective surface area, teach yourself sign language out of a library book so that if she speaks to you, you can easily pretend to be deaf. You are doing well until your eldest child starts school. You know which one is the good mother's Volvo. It's the one with the My Family stickers on the back window. She's the one with the handbag and the mobile phone. You think at first that this knowledge will help you to avoid her. You can just make double the number of green bottles when you start singing as you lap the school in your Hyundai, but you soon realise that the Volvo is parked multiple times around the perimeter, no matter how early or late you arrive. This is her territory. Here she is omnipresent. It's almost Mother's Day, and the kids in your son's kindergarten class are given a photocopied page to fill in. Mostly the page is taken up with a blank square in which each child is to draw a picture. But above the box, there's a line of text that is followed by what you will come to recognise as the ellipsis of doom. I really appreciate it when my mummy ... A week later, you see the completed tributes where they're pinned up on the wall just inside the classroom. All the figures in the pictures wear bright colours, and most have hands pronged with 12 or more fingers. Little Laura reports that she really appreciates it when her mummy tucks her into bed at night. For Oliver, it's his mummy's cupcakes. Tara appreciates it when her mummy takes her to the library. Already you are predisposed to like Clytemnestra, who is a tiny little scun rabbit of a thing to be lugging around the name equivalent of 4 suitcases and a hat box. You see that Clytemnestra has had a go herself at changing mummy to mummies. Her picture is a constellation of mint green spots. She appreciates it when her mummies don't cook peas. You are still smiling at Clytemnestra's peas when the good mother materialises beside you in her black puffer jacket. She patrols the pin-up board with her eyes. She says, happily shocked. Look what your David's done. You haven't yet found your own son's handiwork. And now, even though the good mother's manicured index finger is pointing right at it, somehow your eyes are still missing the mark. They're slipping all over those generously endowed hands and circle-striped bellies. You don't want to know. The good mother realises she's going to have to read it out loud for you. I really appreciate it when my mummy... And she snickers before she continues. When my mummy buys takeaway. Under the sentence that has been written blackly at your son's instruction by one of the teacher's aides, there is a disturbingly accurate reproduction of the Golden Arches. You want to protest that you never take him there yourself. It's your ex who does it, and those birthday parties. It's not as if you can say no to those things. Well, not unless you're the... The good mother interrupts your thoughts with a hand on your upper arm. Oh, honey, she says, you must be so embarrassed. Literary scholars view it as a mystery to be solved by careful textual analysis. Psychoanalysts propose theories that involve words like splitting and internalisation, but you could give them a much simpler explanation. Yes, you could tell them, couldn't you? There's no mystery for you. You could tell them exactly why it is, in fairy tales, that the good mother is always Dead. Thank you very much, folks. Do we want to take any questions, Jackie, or have we got time?
Thank you so much for that. I don't know, have we got a roaming mic? Have we got a technical... Do we have a roaming mic? What was that? We've got good acoustics and there's people here with big voices.